The moment Sophie whispered those words to me, my entire world collapsed. "Grandma," Mommy said, "I can't tell you what I saw at home." I froze, the spatula slipping from my hand, landing on the kitchen tiles with a metallic clang that echoed in the silence. Her eyes, wide, tearful, filled with a terror far too heavy for a 5-year-old, cut through me deeper than any blade. "My name is Evelyn Whitmore, and that morning, in my small worn house on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, I realized something unspeakable was happening. The night before, my daughter-in-law, Melissa Carter, had appeared at my porch with Sophie. It wasn't unusual. She often claimed she had night shifts. But that evening, her demeanor was off. She lingered on the threshold, her knuckles white around the strap of her purse, her eyes darting nervously down the alley as though she were running from some shadow I couldn't see. She repeated the same question 3 times, her voice trembling. "You don't mind keeping Sophie, do you?" And even though I reassured her with a smile, I could feel the chill of unease sliding into my bones. Sophie clung to her mother, clutching her frayed teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, as if it were the only shield she had left. Her school clothes were rumpled, her hair tangled, and her silence pierced me in a way no words could. I hadn't seen my granddaughter laugh freely in months. When Melissa finally turned to leave, she whispered into Sophie's ear, "Sleep well, my love. I'll come back for you tomorrow." Then her gaze met mine, fleeting but sharp, like a silent warning, or perhaps a plea. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that my chest tightened under the weight of something I didn't yet understand. That night, Sophie hardly ate the chicken noodle soup I had prepared. Instead, she curled up on the sofa, staring blankly at the cartoons flickering on the screen. I tried to coax her into conversation, but her lips pressed into silence, and every attempt died in my throat. Later, as she lay on the daybed beside me, clutching Mr. Buttons, I heard the heavy sighs of a child far too young to carry such burdens. Near midnight, her small body trembled in a nightmare. She whimpered in her sleep, "Grandma, I'm scared. Don't leave me." I stroked her hair, whispering, "I'm here, my love. I won't go anywhere." Yet a cold dread seeped through me, like a draft under a locked door. And then came the morning. Sophie, her eyes swollen from tears, sat at the kitchen table hugging Mr. Buttons, while I tried to create a warm breakfast, scrambled eggs and hot cocoa, like I once did for her father Michael when he was little. I asked her gently, "Did you sleep well, sweetheart?" She hesitated, lowered her head, and then whispered the words that shattered me. "Grandma, there's a little girl locked in the basement at home. She keeps crying. She says her hands hurt." The glass of milk tipped, spilling across the table. My knees buckled. I stared at Sophie, my precious granddaughter, trembling under the weight of a secret no child should bear. And in that instant, I knew life would never be the same. That morning, after Sophie's trembling whisper shattered my heart, I tried to gather myself. My hands still shook as I cleared the table, the glass of spilled milk leaving pale streaks across the wood like scars that refused to fade. Sophie had retreated into silence, clinging to her teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, as if it were the last safe anchor in her small world. I could not bring myself to press her further. I had seen enough terror in her eyes to know she was already carrying more than a child should. But one thought consumed me. Was she telling the truth? Could there truly be another little girl, locked in Melissa's basement, suffering in silence? The notion clawed at me relentlessly. My mind screamed for evidence, for some piece of reality to cling to, yet my heart told me Sophie's words were no childish fantasy. When the time came to walk Sophie to school, the morning sun had already climbed high, but its warmth did nothing to ease the cold pit in my stomach. The gravel road stretched before us, familiar yet suddenly foreign, as though each step carried me deeper into a labyrinth I might never escape. Sophie walked quietly by my side, her tiny hand limp in mine. Every so often she glanced up at me, her lips parting as if to speak, only to close again in fearful hesitation. "Sweetheart," I whispered, trying to sound gentle, "you'll see your friends today. Maybe art class will be fun. Remember how you love painting the flowers in spring?" But Sophie only shook her head. tightening her grip on Mr. Buttons. The silence between us was heavier than any reply. At the school gates, children rushed past us, laughter echoing across the playground. Their carefree voices made Sophie flinch, as though even joy had become something unfamiliar. I bent down, smoothing her hair and kissing her forehead. "Go on, darling. I'll be here when class is over." She nodded faintly and disappeared into the throng of children. Yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. Something urged me to stay, a gnawing instinct that told me Sophie's secret could not be ignored. My footsteps led me to the teacher's lounge, a room steeped in the scent of chalk dust and coffee, its walls lined with bulletin boards filled with reminders and children's drawings. That's where I found her teacher, Mrs. Laura Mitchell, a woman in her 40s with soft brown hair pulled into a bun and eyes both kind and sharp, the eyes of someone who noticed everything. "Mrs. Mitchell," I began hesitantly, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. "Could I speak with you for a moment? It's about Sophie." Her brow furrowed instantly. She set aside the papers in her hands and gestured for me to sit on the worn wooden chair across from her desk. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Has something happened?" I took a deep breath, my fingers clutching the strap of my purse so tightly that the leather creaked. "This morning, Sophie told me something that frightened me. She said, 'There's a little girl locked in the basement at home.'" The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Mrs. Mitchell's face went pale, though she tried to mask it. She leaned forward, folding her hands. "Locked in a basement?" she repeated slowly, as if weighing every syllable. "Yes," I whispered. "She swore her mother told her not to say a word. She looked terrified." My throat tightened as I forced the next words. "I don't know what to think, but I can't ignore it." For a long moment, Mrs. Mitchell was silent, her lips pressed together in thought. Then she spoke carefully, her voice low but firm. "I have noticed changes in Sophie these past weeks. She startles easily. She's distracted in class. Sometimes she sits at her desk and stares off, as though she's somewhere far away." Her words stabbed into me. I clenched my hands together, forcing myself to ask, "What kind of changes? Please, tell me everything." Mrs. Mitchell hesitated before reaching for a stack of papers. She pulled out several sheets and placed them gently on the desk. "These are from art class. We ask the children to draw whatever comes to mind. Most draw houses, flowers, families. But Sophie..." I leaned forward, my breath catching. On the paper, drawn in the unsteady lines of a child's hand, was a figure of a little girl standing in a darkened room. Around her, thick black lines crisscrossed like bars of a cage. The child's face was nothing but wide circles for eyes, and a mouth drawn downward into a sob. In another drawing, the same figure sat curled in a corner, hands pressed to her face, while looming shapes hovered above. My heart constricted, my vision blurred with sudden tears. I touched the page with trembling fingers. "Oh, dear God!" Mrs. Mitchell's voice softened, though worry colored every word. "I can't say for certain what these drawings mean. Children sometimes express their fears in strange ways, but these worry me. They're too consistent, always the same theme: loneliness, fear, imprisonment." I sat there frozen, staring at the drawings. It was as if Sophie had given me a window into her soul, into the horrors she had seen and could not voice. A basement, a girl behind bars, a child in pain. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said hoarsely, "do you believe Sophie?" She hesitated, her hands twisting together. "I believe Sophie has seen something that troubles her deeply. Whether it is literal or symbolic, I cannot say, but I do not think she is inventing this out of thin air." The room seemed to close in around me. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt deafening, every flicker a reminder of the urgency pressing on my chest. "Thank you," I managed, standing shakily. I had to know I wasn't imagining it. Mrs. Mitchell rose as well, her gaze steady on mine. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said firmly, "please be careful. If Sophie has witnessed something real, it may be dangerous. But don't let her feel alone. She needs to know she can trust you." I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. I wanted to be strong for Sophie, but inside I felt like a woman standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into darkness. As I stepped out of the school, the cheerful noise of children on the playground struck me like a cruel reminder of innocence. Their laughter was carefree, bright as sunlight, but my granddaughter's laughter had been stolen, replaced with shadows. I clutched the drawings in my purse, feeling the paper crinkle beneath my fingers, and walked home with the weight of a truth I could no longer deny. Somewhere in Melissa's house, there might be another child, a child whose cries had become Sophie's nightmares, a child whose suffering was scrawled in black crayon on classroom paper. And I knew then I could not stay silent. The afternoon sun slanted low, painting long shadows across the porch as I sat in my old rocking chair. Sophie's drawings spread across my lap like broken fragments of a puzzle I could not piece together. The crayon bars, the tear-streaked faces, the lonely little figure trapped in darkness, each sketch whispered a truth I could no longer ignore. My hands trembled as I traced the black lines with my fingertips. I felt sick. If Melissa truly kept a child hidden in her basement, then Sophie had been carrying a burden too terrifying for her small shoulders. And if it wasn't true, if somehow it was only a reflection of grief and trauma, then what kind of life was my granddaughter living, that her art was filled with cages and cries for help? The creak of footsteps on gravel pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. I looked up to see Mr. Harold Benson, my neighbor from across the street, approaching with his steady gait and his ever-present wooden cane. He was an elderly widower, sharp-eyed despite the years carved into his face. His plaid shirt was tucked neatly into faded trousers, and though his step was slow, his gaze was piercing, the kind of gaze that noticed things others missed. "Afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore," he called gently, his voice roughened by age but warm with familiarity. I managed a weak smile, though my insides felt hollow. "Good afternoon, Harold. It's a fine day, isn't it?" He stopped at the foot of my porch, leaning on his cane, studying me. "A fine day for most," he said after a pause, "but not for you, I reckon. You look like you've seen a ghost." His words pierced me. I lowered my eyes, folding the drawings quickly as though they were secrets too dangerous for the sunlight. "I'm just tired," I murmured. But Harold Benson wasn't a man to be fooled easily. He climbed the steps slowly and settled onto the bench beside me. His cane rested against the arm of the chair as he leaned forward, hands clasped. His eyes searched my face. "Evelyn, you've never been one to worry over nothing. If something's wrong, you can tell me. You know that." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to stay silent, to keep the whispers of Sophie locked in the safety of my own mind, but the weight was too heavy. And something in Harold's gaze, firm but kind, urged me to speak. I lowered my voice to a near whisper, afraid the wind itself might carry the words away. "Harold, Sophie told me there's a little girl locked in Melissa's basement." His face stiffened. His lips pressed into a line as though he were weighing every thought before letting it pass. After a long silence, he exhaled. "So, she finally said it out loud." My head snapped toward him, heart hammering. "What do you mean?" Harold's gaze dropped to the porch boards beneath our feet. He rubbed his weathered hands together, his knuckles gnarled from years of labor. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, edged with unease. "There's something I haven't told anyone, Evelyn. Didn't want to meddle, didn't want to accuse. But now." He paused, clearing his throat. "One night last week I couldn't sleep. Went out into my yard to get some air, and that's when I saw it." My breath caught. "Saw what?" He looked at me with eyes sharp as glass. "Melissa. She was rushing into her house, and she wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of a little girl." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My hands gripped the armrest of the rocking chair. "A little girl?" I echoed, my voice faint. "Yes," he said firmly. "And it wasn't Sophie. This child was smaller, with short hair. She looked scared. It was well past midnight. I remember thinking it strange, but I convinced myself it must have been a cousin or a friend's kid. I tried not to think too hard about it." My pulse pounded in my ears. Sophie's whisper echoed in my mind. "There's a little girl locked in the basement." Harold shook his head, his jaw tightening. And I heard something else too, a sound, crying, muffled. I thought maybe Sophie was sick, but now... He broke off. his eyes dark with unease. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. A cold wave washed over me, chilling my bones despite the warm Georgia sun. Dear God, Harold, are you certain of what you saw? His gaze didn't waver. I know what I saw, and I know that wasn't Sophie. I may be old, Evelyn, but my eyes haven't failed me yet. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could hear the distant buzz of cicadas in the trees, the creak of the rocking chair beneath me, and my own heartbeat drumming with terror. It was no longer just Sophie's drawings, no longer just a child's whisper. Someone else had seen it. Another witness. The truth loomed closer, terrifying in its clarity. I felt faint. My mind raced, 1,000 questions clawing at me. Who was the child? Where had she come from? Was she still alive, still trapped, and most of all, what had happened to Melissa, the daughter-in-law who once laughed in my kitchen, whose smile once lit up family dinners? How had she descended into this shadowed place where innocent children cried behind locked doors? I gripped Harold's arm without realizing it, my fingers digging into the fabric of his sleeve. Harold, I don't know what to do. If I tell the police, they'll think I'm mad. They already look at me as though grief has rotted my mind. His voice hardened, the steel of conviction behind it. Then let them. But don't you dare stay silent. If there's a child suffering in that house, silence will be her death sentence, and you know it. His words struck me like a bell tolling the truth. My throat tightened, my eyes burned with tears I could no longer hold back. I can't bear the thought of it. What if I'm wrong? What if Sophie misunderstood? What if I ruin what's left of our family? Harold placed a steady hand on mine. His grip was firm, grounding. And what if you're right, Evelyn? What if that little girl doesn't live to see another sunrise because no one had the courage to believe her? The air seemed to shift, the crepe myrtle blossoms trembling in the wind as though even nature bore witness to the gravity of his words. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. You're right, I whispered. I can't ignore this. I won't. Harold sat back, his eyes softening. Then you do what you must, and know this. You're not alone. I'll stand with you if it comes to that. You've got an ally in me. The weight of his words brought a flicker of relief to the storm inside me. For the first time in days, I felt the faintest spark of hope. I wasn't entirely alone in this battle. Still, as I watched Harold walk back across the street, leaning on his cane, the darkness pressed heavier around me. Sophie's drawings burned in my purse, Harold's testimony echoed in my ears, and Melissa's shadow loomed larger than ever. I stood on the porch, clutching the wooden post for support, and whispered to the wind, Michael, my son, what has happened to your wife? What is she hiding in that house? The only answer was the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a mourning dove. And deep inside, I knew the time had come to face the unthinkable. The decision weighed on me all through the night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sophie's drawings, the little girl behind bars, the face streaked with tears. Then Harold Benson's voice would return, echoing through my mind. I know what I saw. That wasn't Sophie. I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where the faint glow of the street lamp filtered through the blinds, casting crooked stripes of light across the plaster. The silence was unbearable. My house, once full of Michael's laughter and Sophie's giggles, now felt like a tomb. Every creak of the old wood reminded me that I was alone, but also that somewhere not far from me, a child might be trapped in darkness, crying. By dawn, I could no longer endure the paralysis of waiting. My heart pounded as though driving me forward. I rose, dressed slowly in a simple gray coat, and tucked Sophie's drawings carefully into my purse, along with the trembling weight of my fear. I knew the world might laugh at me, call me a crazy old woman overcome with grief. But if I didn't speak, if I didn't act, then silence itself would become my guilt. The bus ride into downtown Atlanta was a blur of fogged windows and unfamiliar faces. I sat near the back, clutching my purse as though it were a lifeline, my knuckles white against the worn leather. Outside, the city passed by, grocery stores opening for the day, children with backpacks crossing streets, workers in suits rushing toward office towers. The normalcy of it all struck me like a cruel joke. How could life flow so steadily when somewhere, hidden in the shadows, a child might be suffering? When the bus finally pulled up near the precinct, my stomach clenched so tightly I thought I might collapse. The police station loomed ahead, an old brick building with weathered stone steps and stained walls that bore the marks of decades. I paused at the entrance, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I almost turned back. What if they didn't believe me? What if they laughed, dismissed me, labeled me delusional? Melissa's whispers had already poisoned the neighborhood. I could almost hear the fish vendor's mocking voice. Poor Mrs. Whitmore, she's lost her mind. But then I thought of Sophie's eyes, wide with fear as she whispered, "Grandma, there's a little girl locked in the basement." That thought propelled me forward. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper, disinfectant, and burnt coffee. The sound of ringing phones and the shuffle of boots on tile filled the lobby. Officers in uniform moved briskly past me, papers in hand, voices clipped and professional. I felt like an intruder, a trembling old woman in a place built for strength and authority. I approached the front desk, where a young patrolman in a crisp blue shirt sat flipping through files. His jaw was sharp, his hair neatly cropped, his expression detached. Clearing my throat, I forced my voice to remain steady. "Excuse me, officer," I said softly. I need to speak with someone in charge. It's urgent." He looked up, his eyes sweeping over me with mild curiosity. Perhaps he saw only another senior citizen, frail and harmless. "And what is this regarding, ma'am?" "It's about my granddaughter and another child," I whispered. "I believe there is a girl being held against her will." His brows rose slightly, but he didn't dismiss me. Instead, he stood gesturing toward a narrow hallway. "Come with me. I'll take you to Captain Hayes." My knees shook as I followed him, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the linoleum. He opened a door to a small office, where a man sat behind a scratched wooden desk cluttered with papers and coffee cups. Captain Robert Hayes looked up. He was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes that spoke of long years in service. Lines of fatigue carved into his face, but there was also a sternness that left little room for nonsense. He motioned for me to sit. The young officer gave a brief nod and left us alone. I lowered myself onto the hard chair, my hands trembling as I clutched my purse. For a moment, silence pressed between us. Finally, Captain Hayes leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "the officer tells me you have something urgent to report. Please explain." I drew in a shaky breath. "My name is Evelyn Whitmore. I live on Rosewood Lane, out by the edge of the city. Yesterday morning, my granddaughter Sophie told me something I cannot ignore. She said her mother, my daughter-in-law, told her not to speak of it. She said there is a little girl locked in the basement at her house." Hayes's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I took courage from that, my words spilling faster, trembling. At first, I thought it might be a nightmare, but Sophie is not a child who lies. She's been quiet, withdrawn, drawing pictures of children in cages. Her teacher, Mrs. Laura Mitchell, can attest to that. And then my neighbor, Harold Benson, he saw Melissa, my daughter-in-law, rushing home one night with a girl who was not Sophie. He heard crying. He swore to me it wasn't his imagination. I placed Sophie's drawings on the desk, my fingers lingering on the crayon lines. "Look, these are from art class. Do you see? Bars. Darkness. A crying child. She's seen something." Hayes leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the desk, his eyes studying me as though weighing truth from delusion. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said after a pause, "I don't doubt your concern. But let me be clear. What we have here are the words of a frightened 5-year-old, a few drawings that could be symbolic, and a neighbor's testimony based on a fleeting glimpse. None of this constitutes probable cause. I cannot authorize a search warrant based on this alone." His words slammed into me like a hammer. My chest tightened. "But Captain, what if it's true? What if there is a child down there, crying, hurt, waiting for someone to save her? If we do nothing, if we wait, she might not survive." My voice cracked, tears stinging my eyes. "I lost my son already, Captain. I can't lose another child, not Sophie, not some innocent girl who has no one else to speak for her. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Sympathy, perhaps even pity, but his tone remained steady. I understand, Mrs. Whitmore. I truly do. But we must follow procedure. We can file your report, note your concerns, but unless we have more concrete evidence, a missing persons report that matches physical proof, we cannot legally enter your daughter-in-law's home. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands clenched tightly on the purse in my lap. My voice came out in a whisper. So you're telling me I have to wait while a child suffers? Hayes sighed, leaning back in his chair. Sometimes waiting is the hardest thing we do in this job, but yes, for now we wait. The walls seemed to close in on me. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as I stared at Sophie's drawings spread across the desk, their crayon bars suddenly looking more like the bars of my own prison. I wanted to scream, to shake this man until he saw what I saw, but my body was frozen. Slowly, I gathered the drawings back into my purse, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fold the papers. I rose to my feet on unsteady legs. Thank you for your time, Captain, I murmured, though inside my heart was breaking. As I left the precinct, the fluorescent lights above hummed mercilessly, and the sound of officers' voices seemed distant, mocking. I pushed through the heavy doors into the harsh glare of the midday sun, but instead of warmth, I felt only cold. The city moved on as though nothing had changed. Cars honked, people laughed, children tugged at their mothers' sleeves. Yet I walked among them like a ghost, hollow and unseen. I found myself at the bus stop, lowering onto the bench with a heaviness that pressed every bone in my body. Around me, strangers chatted idly, scrolling on their phones, sipping coffee, and all I could think was, there is a child in darkness, crying, and no one believes me. When the bus rumbled forward, I stared through the window at the blur of streets and trees. My reflection in the glass looked pale, almost unfamiliar. For a moment, I wondered if the neighborhood whispers were true. Was I mad? Had grief hollowed me so deeply that I invented shadows where none existed? But then I saw Sophie's face in my mind, those wide, terrified eyes, the tremble in her voice as she whispered her secret. I knew then that I wasn't mad. She was telling the truth. The only madness was a world that refused to listen. By the time I returned home, the red crepe myrtles in my yard were in bloom, their blossoms falling like drops of blood across the porch. I sat on the steps, burying my face in my hands. The neighborhood murmurs drifted on the wind, cruel and cutting. Poor Evelyn, she's losing her mind. But I knew better. Somewhere a child was waiting. And though the police had turned me away, I would not stop. I couldn't. The days after my visit to the police station felt like walking through quicksand. Each hour dragged, heavy and suffocating, pulling me deeper into despair. I had hoped Captain Hayes would at least send an officer to check Melissa's house, but no one came. The silence from the precinct was deafening, and my own house became a prison of doubt. Whenever I stepped outside, I felt the sting of whispers. At the market, the fish vendor leaned toward her colleague, her voice loud enough for me to hear. Poor Mrs. Whitmore. She misses her granddaughter so much she's making up stories. Another woman chimed in. It's sad, really. Grief can do that to a person. Their words cut deeper than knives. I kept my head down, clutching my grocery bag, pretending not to hear, though my heart ached with humiliation. Melissa had moved faster than I realized. She'd spread her version of the story, that I was delusional, obsessed, trying to take Sophie away from her. And the neighbors who once smiled kindly now looked at me with pitying eyes, as though I were a fragile vase on the verge of shattering. But inside, I was burning. Anger, fear, grief, they tangled in my chest until I could barely breathe. Every night, I sat staring at Michael's photograph, whispering, "Son, guide me. Tell me what to do. I can't let Sophie carry this alone." It was during one of those restless afternoons, while I trimmed the red crepe myrtles in my yard, that salvation arrived. The petals fluttered down like drops of blood, and I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten when I heard hurried footsteps approaching. I turned and saw Mr. Harold Benson making his way up the path, his cane tapping against the stones. But there was something different about him. His expression was taut, urgent, his eyes alive with purpose. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called, his voice lower than usual. "I think you need to see this." I wiped my hands on my apron, my heart leaping to my throat. "What is it, Harold?" He glanced around, as though afraid someone might be listening, then lowered his voice to a whisper. "Not out here. Inside." I ushered him into my kitchen, the room still heavy with the lingering smell of morning coffee. He closed the door firmly behind us and reached into his pocket, pulling out a battered old cell phone. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the screen. "My nephew runs the corner store down the street," he explained, his voice taut with restrained emotion. "He checked the security cameras from last week at my request. Evelyn, you need to see this." He held the phone out to me, and my breath caught as the screen flickered to life. The video was grainy, taken from across the street in the dead of night. For a moment, all I saw was darkness and the faint glow of a street lamp. Then, the figure appeared. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, her hair disheveled, her posture tense, glancing over her shoulder as she hurried into her house. And beside her, clinging to her hand, was a child. Not Sophie. The girl was smaller, her hair cut short and uneven, her pajamas rumpled as though she had been pulled from bed. Even through the blurry footage, I could see it. The way she stumbled slightly, her shoulders slumped, her body radiating fear. My hand flew to my mouth. "Dear God," Harold's voice was steady, though his eyes glistened. "That's what I saw with my own eyes that night. I didn't imagine it, Evelyn, and now we have proof." Tears welled up as I clutched the phone, my fingers trembling violently. The room seemed to spin. This wasn't just Sophie's whisper. It wasn't just a drawing or a memory twisted by grief. This was real. Cold, undeniable reality. "There's no mistake?" I whispered, my voice breaking. Harold shook his head firmly. "No mistake. That's not your granddaughter, and I'd stake my life on it." I sank into the nearest chair, my knees weak. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The image on the screen burned itself into my mind, the frail figure of that unknown child, swallowed by Melissa's shadow as they disappeared into the house. Sophie had been telling the truth all along. I felt shame wash over me, hot and suffocating. Shame that I had ever doubted her, that I had let the police's cold refusal shake my conviction. My granddaughter's courage had been greater than mine, and now the weight of her secret bore down on me heavier than ever. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. "You have to take this to the police, Evelyn. Right now." I looked up at him, my tears blurring his weathered face. "They didn't believe me before. They said it wasn't enough." He leaned closer, his eyes fierce. "But this is different. This is evidence. They can't turn you away now." His words jolted me back to life. My body trembled as I rose, clutching the phone as though it were a holy relic. "You're right. I can't waste another minute." Within the hour, I was back on the bus, my purse pressed against my chest, the phone clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded with every turn of the wheels, each stop feeling like an eternity. I barely noticed the faces around me, the tired commuters, the laughing teenagers, the mother soothing her baby. All I could see was that girl in the video, her frightened form etched into my soul. When the precinct finally came into view, I nearly stumbled off the bus. My legs felt like lead as I climbed the familiar stone steps, my breath coming in short gasps. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the same noise as before, the ringing phones, the shuffle of boots, the smell of burnt coffee. But this time, I wasn't leaving until someone listened. The young patrolman at the desk looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes when he recognized me. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're back?" "Yes," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "And this time, I have proof." He must have seen the fire in my eyes, because he didn't hesitate. Within minutes, I was once again seated in front of Captain Hayes, his tired eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said slowly, "is there something new?" Without a word, I placed Harold's phone on his desk and pressed play. The video began, the grainy image filling the small screen. We watched in silence as Melissa appeared, dragging the unknown girl into her house under cover of night. I kept my gaze fixed on Captain Hayes's face, searching for the slightest crack in his stoic mask. For a moment he remained motionless, his eyes narrowing. Then he leaned closer, watching again, his jaw tightening. "That is not your granddaughter," he said at last, his voice grave. "No," I whispered, tears welling. "It isn't." He sat back, exhaling heavily, and turned to the officer standing nearby. "Check our missing persons report. See if this girl matches any active case." The young officer nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. The room was tense, the only sound the steady clack of keys. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Then the officer froze, his eyes widening. "Captain, I think we've got something." Hayes stood, moving quickly to the monitor. I leaned forward, breath caught in my throat. On the screen appeared a photograph, a little girl with short hair and wide eyes. Emily Parker, age 5. Reported missing 2 weeks ago in the neighboring county. The world seemed to spin. My hand gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. Tears blurred my vision, but I saw the undeniable match between the girl in the video and the child in the missing persons file. Captain Hayes's expression shifted. The doubt that had clouded his eyes before was gone, replaced by cold determination. He straightened, his voice firm, commanding. "Verify immediately. Contact the Parker family. Request the full file, and prepare the paperwork for a search warrant." The words washed over me like a tide of relief so powerful it nearly knocked me breathless. For the first time in weeks, someone believed me. Not just believed me, acted on it. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, whispering, "Thank you, God." Hayes turned back to me, his expression still stern but softened at the edges. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've done the right thing. We'll handle it from here. But I'll be honest with you, it won't be easy." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I don't care if it's easy. I only care that little girl is saved, and that Sophie no longer has to carry this weight." For the first time, I saw respect in his eyes. Not pity, not skepticism. Respect. And it gave me the strength to rise on unsteady legs, ready to face whatever storm was coming. As I left the precinct, the afternoon sun shone brighter than it had in weeks. The city around me still bustled with indifference, but inside, a fire burned strong. The world might have doubted me before, but now the truth had a voice, and it was loud enough to shake the silence. The night after Captain Hayes confirmed the match, I hardly slept. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, every drop echoing the pounding of my heart. My old house felt like a ship tossed in a storm, creaking with the weight of secrets and prayers. On the wall, Michael's photo caught the glow of the streetlight, his familiar smile steady, unchanging, as if urging me to hold on a little longer. Around midnight, the phone rang. My hand trembled as I answered. "Mrs. Whitmore," came Captain Hayes's voice, steady and grave. "The warrant's been approved. At dawn, we move on Melissa Carter's residence. Be prepared." For a moment, I could only clutch the receiver, the words crashing over me like waves. "Yes, Captain," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'll be ready." When I hung up, the silence returned, but it was different, charged, electric, alive with both dread and hope. I walked through my small home, carefully placing things in order as if tomorrow might bring strangers into my space. I tucked Sophie's drawings into a folder, smoothed the creases of the family album, and laid out the scarf I would wear. A strange ritual, but it gave me calm, as though preparing my armor for the battle ahead. I sat once more before Michael's portrait. "Son," I whispered, my voice trembling, "tomorrow everything changes. Give me strength. Watch over Sophie. Watch over that little girl." By the time dawn broke, my body felt leaden from exhaustion, but my spirit burned. The sound of engines outside jolted me upright. Flashing lights painted the walls of my home red and blue. I wrapped the scarf around my head, grabbed the folder, and stepped onto the porch. 2 police cars waited, their presence heavy, undeniable. Captain Hayes stood tall, his coat collar turned up against the morning chill, his face carved with focus. He looked at me and gave a curt nod. "Let's go, Mrs. Whitmore." The ride to Melissa's neighborhood was silent, tense. I sat in the back of the cruiser, watching the familiar streets roll past through fogged glass. The houses looked ordinary, peaceful, but I knew that behind one of those walls, horror was hidden. My chest ached with the thought of Sophie sleeping inside, perhaps hearing muffled sobs through the floorboards, carrying secrets too heavy for a child. When we arrived, the neighborhood was just beginning to stir. Curtains twitched, porch lights flickered on. The police vehicles drew quiet attention. I stepped out, the cold air biting my cheeks, and stared at Melissa's house. It stood ordinary, modest, with red crepe myrtles scattered across the front yard like drops of blood spilled by fate itself. Captain Hayes approached the front door, flanked by 2 officers. His knock was sharp, deliberate. The door swung open abruptly. Melissa Carter stood there, her face pale but her eyes blazing with fury. "What is this?" she hissed. "You have no right." Hayes held the paper up, his voice flat, authoritative. "We have a search warrant, Mrs. Carter. Please step aside." Melissa's gaze darted from the warrant to me, and for a moment I felt her eyes pierce my very soul. Hatred burned in them, pure, searing hatred. She jabbed a trembling finger at me. You did this. You've been trying to destroy me from the start." I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat closed, my hands clenched around my scarf. I wanted to tell her I only wanted to save Sophie, to protect the children, but the words died in the storm of her rage. Suddenly, Jacob Carter, Melissa's brother, appeared from behind her, his large frame filling the doorway. "This is harassment," he roared. "You're humiliating my sister in front of the whole neighborhood. Get out!" 2 officers stepped forward, blocking him as Hayes's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand aside, sir. Do not interfere." The air crackled with tension. Neighbors began to gather along the sidewalk, murmuring, clutching their coats against the morning chill. Faces I'd known for decades now stared at me with wide eyes, whispers rippling through the crowd. "Could it be true?" I heard one voice say. "She said there was a child in the basement," another murmured. Melissa's face twisted in desperation as Hayes and his officers pushed past her. Her voice cracked, shrill and panicked. "There's nothing here. It's just a storage room. You won't find anything." But her fear betrayed her. Inside, the officers moved with precision, opening doors, scanning rooms, boots echoing against the floor. Melissa followed, sobbing, screaming accusations at me. "You're insane. You're jealous. You want Sophie for yourself." Each word struck like a whip, but I stayed in the yard, frozen, my eyes on the small iron door at the end of the hallway, the one Sophie had whispered about. When the officers reached it, Melissa lunged forward, spreading her arms wide. "You can't go in there. It's private, just boxes, junk, nothing else." Her voice broke, her tears sudden and frantic. But it was too late. One officer stepped forward with the master key. Jacob howled, straining against 2 policemen as they restrained him. "Leave it closed. You have no right." The key turned with a harsh metallic click. My breath caught in my throat. The door creaked open, and from within spilled a wave of damp, stale air, the kind that clings to old wounds and buried secrets. Then came the sound, a child's sob, weak, muffled, but unmistakable. The crowd gasped. My knees buckled, and I clutched the porch column for support. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, yet at the same time I felt vindication. Sophie hadn't been lying. My granddaughter had carried this unbearable truth, and now the world would finally see it. "Flashlights!" Hayes barked. The beams swept across the basement. Dust, broken boxes, cobwebs, and then, from the shadowed corner, a small figure stumbled forward. Emily Parker. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, her hair tangled. She wore ripped pajamas, clinging to her thin frame. Her arm was crudely wrapped in a filthy rag, and her eyes, wide, terrified, met the officers with a mix of fear and fragile hope. My hand flew to my mouth. Tears streamed uncontrollably. "Oh, sweet child," I whispered, though my voice was lost in the commotion. A female officer rushed forward, lifting Emily into her arms. "We've got her. Call EMS now," she shouted. The yard erupted with murmurs, gasps, and cries of disbelief. Neighbors who had called me delusional only days ago now covered their mouths, some with tears in their eyes. Melissa collapsed onto the floor, screaming, "No, I was protecting her. You don't understand." Her words tumbled out, wild and incoherent, while officers pulled her up and secured her wrists in handcuffs. Jacob fought violently, spitting curses, but 2 officers dragged him away as his roars echoed down the street. I stood frozen, trembling, as Emily was carried out into the morning light. The girl clutched a tattered cushion, her hands shaking. My vision blurred as I thought of Sophie, my own granddaughter, forced to live under the same roof where this horror unfolded. Captain Hayes turned to me. His expression was firm, but for the first time I saw respect, even compassion, in his eyes. "You were right, Mrs. Whitmore, all along." The crowd parted as the ambulance doors closed around Emily. The sound of sirens soon pierced the air, carrying her away to safety. Around me, neighbors lowered their heads. Mrs. O'Connor, who once whispered that I'd gone mad, now muttered, "God forgive us, we should have listened." Others avoided my eyes, shame heavy on their faces, but I felt no triumph, only sorrow. My gaze drifted back to the doorway where Sophie stood, clutching Mr. Buttons tight against her chest, her little face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Our eyes met, and in hers I saw both relief and fear. She had carried the truth, and now it was out, but at a cost no child should ever bear. I wanted to run to her, to wrap her in my arms, but Melissa's scream pierced the air once more. "You destroyed me, Evelyn." She spat as officers pulled her away. "You took everything." Her words echoed, bitter and venomous, even as she was shoved into the patrol car. I closed my eyes, a silent prayer forming on my lips. Not everything, Melissa. Not Sophie. Not Emily. Not today. The morning sun rose higher, its light cutting through the dark clouds, and though the storm was far from over, for the first time I felt that truth had broken through. The hours after the raid blurred together like a half-remembered dream. Sirens had wailed, neighbors had whispered, Melissa had been led away in handcuffs, her brother Jacob cursing until the car door slammed shut behind him. And through it all I had stood in the yard, trembling, my eyes fixed on Sophie, my sweet granddaughter, clutching Mr. Buttons to her chest, her face pale as moonlight. That night I did not sleep. Instead, I sat by Sophie's side, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she drifted into an uneasy slumber. Every so often she whimpered, her small hand clutching mine with desperate strength. Each whimper was a dagger in my heart. She had carried too much, seen too much. No child should have to whisper the kind of secret she had shared with me that morning at the kitchen table. By dawn, my resolve was iron. I dressed carefully, placed Sophie's drawings and the folder of evidence back into my bag, and waited. When the phone finally rang, I nearly dropped it from my trembling hands. It was Captain Hayes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Emily Parker has been admitted to County General. Her parents are on their way. You should be there." The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and despair. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a harsh, sterile glow. I moved quickly, Sophie's small hand in mine, until we reached the pediatric wing. There, through a pane of glass, I saw them. The Parkers, a thin woman with red-rimmed eyes, clutched Emily against her chest, rocking her as though she would never let go again. Beside her, a tall man wiped his face with the back of his hand, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Emily's hair was freshly washed, her arm now wrapped in a clean bandage, but her wide eyes still carried shadows. Yet when her mother kissed her forehead, the corners of her lips curved in the faintest smile. I pressed a hand to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. Sophie squeezed my fingers, her gaze fixed on Emily with a mixture of recognition and relief. For the first time, she wasn't carrying the secret alone. Mrs. Parker noticed us through the glass. She rose at once, still holding Emily, and hurried into the hallway. Without hesitation, she reached for my hand. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Her voice broke. "We don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you and your granddaughter, we might never have seen our Emily again." Tears spilled freely down my cheeks. "It wasn't me," I whispered. "It was Sophie. She was the brave one." Sophie ducked her head shyly, pressing Mr. Buttons to her face, but Mrs. Parker knelt and embraced her tightly. "You are a hero," she said softly, "a true hero." Mr. Parker joined them, his eyes wet with gratitude. He shook my hand firmly, his grip steady despite the tremor in his voice. You brought the light back into our lives. We will never forget this. For a moment, warmth spread through me like sunlight after a storm, yet beneath it lay sorrow. Because while the Parkers rejoiced, my own family was shattered. Melissa, the girl who had once called me Mom, who had laughed beside me in my kitchen, was now behind bars, accused of crimes too dark to comprehend. When Sophie looked up at me, confusion clouding her innocent face, I forced a smile. It's all right now, sweetheart, I murmured. Emily is safe. And you? You are safe too. But inside, I wondered, safe from what? Safe from her own mother's choices? Safe from the stigma of being Melissa Carter's daughter? Those questions twisted in my chest like thorns, with no answers to soothe them. As we left the hospital, a small crowd had gathered outside. Reporters held microphones, cameras flashed, voices clamored with questions. Is it true your daughter-in-law was involved in a cult? How did you know about the child in the basement? What role did your granddaughter play? I shielded Sophie with my arm, refusing to let her tiny face be consumed by the frenzy. No comments, I said firmly, pushing through the sea of bodies. But even beyond the reporters, I saw familiar faces. Neighbors, people who only days ago had called me crazy, pitied me, whispered that grief had driven me mad. Now their eyes held something different, shame, regret, even respect. Mrs. O'Connor, who once muttered that I was delusional, stepped forward, wringing her hands. Evelyn, she whispered, unable to meet my gaze. We were wrong. We doubted you. Please forgive us. I stared at her, my heart heavy. This isn't about me, I said quietly. It's about the children. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, retreating into the crowd. Later that afternoon, I sat on my porch beneath the blooming crepe myrtles. The petals drifted around me like a red carpet, though there was no celebration in my heart. Sophie played quietly at my feet, tracing patterns in the dirt with Mr. Buttons clutched in one hand. For the first time in weeks, she hummed softly to herself. It was a fragile sound, but it pierced the silence with hope. My old friend Helen Morris appeared at the gate, a casserole dish in her hands. She smiled sadly as she approached. Clara, she began, then corrected herself, her voice steady. Evelyn, you were right all along. I knew it in my heart, but I should have stood with you sooner. I took the dish, my hands trembling. You did stand with me, Helen. Your words gave me the strength to keep going. Without that, I might have given up. She touched my shoulder gently. Then don't ever doubt yourself again. You saved them. Both of them. As evening fell, I watched Sophie chase fireflies in the yard. Her laughter, soft, tentative, but real, filled the air. I closed my eyes, feeling the cool breeze on my face, and whispered to Michael, Son, your little girl is safe. The truth is out. And though our family is broken, we will find a way to heal. For the first time in months, peace brushed against my heart like the wing of a bird. Fragile, fleeting, but enough. The days that followed felt like walking through the wreckage of a storm. The sirens had faded, the neighbors' whispers softened, and yet the silence in my home weighed heavier than ever. Though Emily was safe in her parents' arms and Sophie laughed more freely each day, I could not escape the shadow of Melissa, my daughter-in-law, the woman who once called me Mom. The evening news filled my living room with grim updates. The anchor's voice was clipped, factual. Melissa Carter, 34, has been charged with kidnapping, unlawful detention, and possible ties to a religious extremist group. Investigators discovered notebooks in her basement containing references to the late Elias Thorne, leader of the disbanded Ascendant Circle cult. Authorities believe Melissa may have been influenced by remnants of this group. I sat frozen in my old armchair, Sophie asleep upstairs, the glow of the television flickering across Michael's photograph. His smile stared down at me, and for the first time I couldn't bear to meet his eyes. Your wife, Michael, I whispered, my voice cracking. The woman you love, the mother of your child, how did she fall into this darkness? What did I miss? Where was I blind? Memories surged. Melissa in my kitchen years ago, her laughter light, her hands busy kneading dough as we cooked together. She had been radiant, brimming with hope for her future with Michael and their baby girl. How had that sunflower smile withered into the hollow eyes of a woman who locked a child in her basement? The next day, I received a call from Captain Hayes. His tone was steady, professional, but laced with a weight I recognized. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I wanted you to hear from me before the press runs it. Melissa isn't talking, but the writings in her possession, notes, symbols signed with Elias Thorne's name, suggest she had been in contact with known associates. It may have started after your son's passing." After Michael's passing. The words echoed, slicing me open. I remembered those weeks after the accident, the way Melissa had locked herself in her room, her sobs muffled by closed doors. I had told myself it was grief, raw and unbearable. But perhaps grief had left her vulnerable, a crack through which darker forces slipped. Did she, my voice faltered, did she hurt Emily, beyond keeping her locked up? A pause. Then Hayes answered carefully. Emily's injuries were limited to neglect and a poorly treated wound on her arm, but emotionally, the scars may run deep. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips, fighting tears. Relief and devastation churned together inside me. Emily was alive, but she should never have suffered at all. That afternoon, I sat on the porch as neighbors passed by, some offering cautious smiles, others murmuring apologies. But their pity no longer mattered to me. My thoughts were consumed by Melissa. I remembered the look she gave me as she was dragged away in handcuffs. Hatred, betrayal, a venom that pierced my soul. And yet, beneath it I wondered, was there still a trace of the young woman who once loved Michael, who once smiled at Sophie with tenderness? Or had she been consumed entirely by the shadows of Elias Thorne's twisted teachings? Helen Morris came by with tea, sensing the turmoil inside me. She sat quietly, letting the steam curl between us before speaking. "Evelyn, you can't carry Melissa's choices on your shoulders. She walked this path herself." I stared at the red petals scattered on the ground. But she was family, Helen. She was part of Michael's life, part of Sophie's. How do I reconcile the woman she was with what she's done? Helen reached for my hand, her grip steady. "You don't. You accept both truths, that she was once the girl who laughed in your kitchen and that she became the woman who locked a child away. Both are real. Both exist, but only one defines her now." Her words cut deep, but they also steadied me. I realized then that clinging to the memory of Melissa as she once was would only chain me to grief. I had to let go, not to erase her, but to protect Sophie, to move forward. That night, I knelt beside Sophie's bed as she slept, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "My love," I whispered, "I promise you this. You will never carry your mother's shadow alone. You will know her love, but you will not bear her sins." Outside, the wind rustled the crepe myrtles, scattering petals across the yard. And for the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of peace, not because the pain was gone, but because I had chosen to face it. The storm had passed, yet its scars lingered everywhere, in my heart, in Sophie's fragile eyes, in the hushed voices of neighbors who now spoke to me with reverence instead of doubt. Life on our street in Atlanta slowly returned to its rhythms. Children riding bicycles at dusk, porch lights flickering on at supper time, church bells chiming across the neighborhood on Sundays. But for me, nothing would ever be quite the same. The day after Melissa's arrest, Sophie refused to leave my side. She followed me from the kitchen to the porch, from the garden to the living room, clutching Mr. Button so tightly I feared the seams might finally give way. She laughed sometimes, tiny, uncertain laughs, but always glanced over her shoulder as if expecting shadows to follow her. I knew healing would not come overnight, yet I was determined. Sophie would not be defined by her mother's sins. She would not carry that burden forever. I enrolled her in counseling with Mrs. Laura Mitchell, her teacher, who graciously agreed to meet her twice a week outside of school. In those quiet sessions, Sophie began to draw again. Not dark basements, not cages of black lines, but flowers, birds, and bright suns. One afternoon, she shyly handed me a page where she had sketched Emily Parker holding hands with her. Their smiles were wide, their arms stretched as if reaching for the sky. Tears welled in my eyes as I kissed her forehead. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. So beautiful. Emily, too, was healing. The Parkers visited often, bringing pies and warm casseroles as tokens of gratitude. Watching Sophie and Emily play together on my porch filled me with both sorrow and joy. Their laughter rang out, free yet fragile, like glass bells that could shatter at the slightest tremor. But at least they rang. At least they were not silenced anymore. The community's change in attitude was slower, more complicated. Some neighbors crossed the street to speak with me, offering tearful apologies. "We should have trusted you, Evelyn," Mrs. O'Connor said one morning, her voice breaking. "We judged you too harshly." I accepted her apology, but a quiet part of me wondered why it took a child's suffering to make them believe. Others brought gifts, flowers, fresh bread, even a quilt stitched by the ladies at church. These tokens were meant to honor me, but I accepted them for Sophie's sake. Let her see kindness now, not whispers behind hands. Still, there were nights when the weight of everything bore down on me. I would sit alone in my rocking chair, staring at Michael's photograph. "Your daughter is safe," I whispered to the silence. "But your wife, she lost her way. I'm trying, son. I'm trying to give Sophie the life she deserves." The house would creak around me, and in those moments, I almost believed Michael could hear. One Sunday, the pastor of our small church invited Sophie and me to light the candles at the altar. As we stood before the congregation, Sophie's small hand in mine, I felt the eyes of the community on us. But for the first time, they were not eyes of pity or suspicion. They were eyes of respect, of solidarity. Sophie's flame trembled in her hand, but it burned steady as she set it down. When she looked up at me, I saw pride flicker in her eyes. After the service, a woman I barely knew approached me. Her voice was low, hesitant. "Mrs. Whitmore, your story, it gave me courage. I've been afraid to speak about things happening in my own home, but now I think I will." Her words struck me like a revelation. Perhaps that was the true purpose of all this suffering, that our pain might give someone else the strength to step into the light. At home that evening, Sophie curled up beside me on the porch swing. The crepe myrtles rustled gently, their petals falling like soft rain. She rested her head against my arm and whispered, "Grandma, am I still a hero?" I turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, Sophie, you are the bravest hero I've ever known. You spoke the truth when no one else would. You saved Emily, and you reminded me never to stop fighting for what's right." Her lips curved into a smile, the kind of smile I thought I'd lost forever. She hugged Mr. Buttons and whispered, "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, my darling," I replied, tears slipping down my cheeks. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The pain of Melissa's betrayal would never fully fade, nor would the memory of the neighbor's doubt. But I had Sophie, I had the truth, and I had the faint but steady hope that tomorrow would be brighter. And in the quiet of that Georgia evening, beneath the fading sun and the whisper of crepe myrtle petals, I felt Michael's presence. Not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as a warm certainty that he was proud. Proud of Sophie, proud of me, proud that the truth had finally triumphed. Weeks passed, and though the noise of reporters and flashing cameras faded, the echo of what had happened lingered in every corner of my life. My once quiet street in Atlanta had become a place where people spoke in softer voices, where eyes met mine with newfound respect, and where Sophie could finally walk without the weight of unspoken secrets. But healing is not a straight path. It is a winding road, with shadows and light interwoven. Some nights Sophie still woke crying, clutching Mr. Buttons, her body trembling until I wrapped her in my arms. Other nights I sat awake in my rocking chair, listening to the house breathe, the creak of old wood carrying me back to the image of Melissa screaming as she was led away. I could never erase Melissa from my heart entirely. She was Sophie's mother, Michael's wife, once my daughter-in-law. I grieved not only for her crimes, but for the bright young woman she used to be, the one who baked bread with me, who laughed beside Michael, who dreamed of a future now shattered. Grief is cruel that way. It does not allow you to choose which memories stay. It gives you both, the light and the darkness, and forces you to carry them together. yet life pushed forward. Emily Parker, once the frightened girl in the basement, came to visit often with her parents. Her smile grew wider with each passing day, her laughter brighter. The Parkers insisted Sophie was part of their family now. "She saved our daughter," Mrs. Parker said, her eyes shining. "She'll always have a place in our home." The bond between Sophie and Emily blossomed like spring flowers after a bitter winter. They played in the yard, chased fireflies, shared secrets whispered under the crepe myrtles. Watching them, I felt something I thought I had lost forever: hope. One afternoon, Sophie and Emily put on a small play on my porch, using bedsheets as costumes. They declared themselves guardians of the truth, their voices high and proud. The neighbors gathered, smiling and clapping, their faces lit not just by amusement but by something deeper, a recognition that these children carried wisdom beyond their years. Mrs. O'Connor, tears in her eyes, turned to me. "Your granddaughter has taught us all, Evelyn. She reminded us to listen. To children, to each other, to the quiet truths we'd rather ignore. We'll never forget this." Her words settled over me like a benediction. I realized then that what had begun as a nightmare had transformed into something larger, a lesson that rippled through our community. Silence had been broken, secrets had been dragged into the light, and though the scars remained, the truth had sown seeds of change. On Michael's birthday, Sophie and I visited his grave. She laid a small bunch of wildflowers on the stone and whispered, "Daddy, I was brave. Grandma says you'd be proud." I knelt beside her, pressing my hand to the cool granite. "She's right, Michael," I whispered. "Your little girl saved another child. She carried the truth when no one else would, and she gave me the strength to keep fighting." The breeze stirred the trees above us, carrying the scent of earth and blossoms. For a moment, I felt his presence as surely as if he stood beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. As the sun dipped low, Sophie slipped her small hand into mine. "Grandma," she asked softly, "are we safe now?" I looked down at her, at the brave child who had spoken words that changed everything. "Yes, my love," I said, my voice steady. "We are safe. Because the truth is stronger than fear, and because we have each other." That night, back at home, I sat on the porch while Sophie slept upstairs. The crepe myrtles glowed red in the moonlight, petals drifting like confetti onto the steps. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool night air. I thought of Melissa, of the cult that had ensnared her, of the lives nearly destroyed. I thought of Emily, now safe, and of the Parkers' tears of gratitude. I thought of my neighbors, who had learned not to dismiss an old woman's words so quickly. Most of all, I thought of Sophie, my granddaughter, my hero. The story was not just mine. It was Sophie's. It was Emily's. It was every child who had ever whispered a truth too heavy for their small shoulders to bear. And so, I share it now, with you, with the world, not to judge but to remind. The courage of a child can topple even the darkest lies. Listening can save a life. Silence can destroy one. As I whisper my evening prayer, I feel it in my bones. Truth may be buried, ridiculed, denied, but it never dies. And in our little corner of Atlanta, beneath the crepe myrtles and the fading stars, the truth has finally conquered the darkness.